In a moment, we'll learn more about that little unbreakable Nissan pickup truck. But that actually happens to be the very first video I ever recorded and edited, and that took place in the summer of 2004.
So let's talk about my fourth vehicle. According to my list, my fourth vehicle was a 1987 Nissan D21 pickup truck. Blue. So, that little truck, let me tell you some great stories about that little blue truck. It was probably, of all the vehicles that I've ever owned in my life, that one I think ranks as one of the top picks. So, a little backstory. We had a neighbor. He was actually originally from Romania, and he moved here with his parents back in the 1980s. And at some point, they made the decision to move back to Romania. And when they did, they gave him one of their vehicles. It was a kind of a dark, non-metallic blue 1987 Nissan pickup truck. It was a vehicle that they had purchased to do yard work. They bought it used in the mid-90s. And they bought it really just to do yard cleanup stuff. It had low miles, about 82,000 miles or so. It was fairly low when he got it. When they moved back to Romania, that's when they gave him the truck. And he used that as his primary vehicle for a couple of years. And I actually maintained it for him. We lived right next to each other, and he occasionally would ask me if I could, change its oil or, do some tune-up stuff to it, and I had no problem with that. Those little trucks are very simple to work on. Now, this was back when I was still working on my first car, the '87 Nissan Volkswagen. So, I remember one time I did plugs, wires, and I did an air filter, I did an oil change, and the truck ran beautifully, absolutely flawless. It looked like crap. I mean, the paint was flaking off all over the truck, but it had no real rust. It was, for New England, one of these trucks in that condition was actually quite rare. And so a couple years later, I was in my car accident with my 97 Mazda 626, and I was still in crutches, but I needed a vehicle to get to my appointments, and I didn't have a lot of money, and I didn't want to take out a car loan. So I called up my friend, and I said, hey, that truck is sitting in your driveway, you're not using it, and I'm offering to buy it from you, and how much would you want? And he said, sure, no problem. I was surprised. We agreed on a price. I think I paid $500 for this thing. Now, this is an '87 Nissan pickup truck, two-wheel drive, base model, and this, I think I bought it in the spring of 2004. So it was a few years old, but it was a solid truck. Didn't need any real work. I didn't think so, and he was doing me a favor, so kind of worked out. And because I had done him a lot of favors, didn't really charge him for anything, and so he wanted to help me out too. So it was a nice mutual arrangement that we had there. So I drove over to his house. I gave him the money, got a bill of sale, drove the thing home. This truck had rubber floors. It had a few options. It had an optional AM/FM stereo. It had the option, and this is all factory, the optional rear slider window. It had really not much else. It was an ultra base model pickup. No AC, but everything worked. The heat worked. The crank windows all worked. It had a nice, probably 6-7 foot. It was like a 6-foot bed. And steel wheels, 4-cylinder. It had the Nissan 2.4 NAPS Z engine, the Z24, Z24 engine, that's what they called it. And it had the 4-speed automatic with electronic overdrive. And I was happy as a clam driving this truck. I liked the way I love the way it drove. It was had soft but firm suspension. It was a good little truck. And most importantly, I didn't have any car loans. I owned the thing outright, and it was just, this is going to be my new vehicle, and I'm okay with that. It looked like hell, and I had actually planned on spray bombing it black anyway, because that's how you make crappy vehicles look good. You go over to Home Depot or AutoZone and you buy all the cheapest black flat paint they sell, and you just spray the whole vehicle the same color, and guess what? It looked like $1 million. So anyway, I brought it home. I started cleaning it up. I was still I don't think I had crutches, but I did have one of those plastic boot things for my ankle. And so I'm hobbling around, just getting this truck ready for registration and inspection, make sure everything's good. I'm cleaning it up. The guy smoked like a chimney, and this truck was disgusting inside. It had a vinyl bench seat. This is back when trucks were trucks, man. You could buy a truck with no options, a bench seat, and pay $6,000. That's just the kind of world we used to live in. We don't live in that world anymore. But so yeah, I mean, as far as cosmetics, the vinyl seat was cracked in a few spots. The dash had a few cracks in it. The vinyl padded dash. But overall, it was a solid little truck. It ran like a top. Now, I was the one who did all the maintenance to it, so I knew the engine was good. The transmission fluid was burnt, but it still shifted all right. So once I got the thing in my possession, I took a few $100 out of the bank, and I brought it to have the transmission flushed. By this point, the truck had about 84,000 miles on it, which is very low for a vehicle of that age. And I had the transmission flushed. I had the differential changed, the engine oil. I just went through it. I had the cooling system flushed. And I thought, okay, this is it. So I'm driving it around, and I noticed the speedometer doesn't work. So there's a common problem with the Nissan D21 hard bodies, where the speedometer needle would actually, over time, it would warp, and it would start to rub against the dial face. And the solution to that was you either replace the entire cluster or you find another needle. So I went to a junkyard and I found a replacement cluster, and I pieced together a good working cluster for the truck. The radio, I swapped it out with a cheap eBay special CD player. And it was interesting because it had a CD player, a digital tuning dial, but it was an analog tuner, which was bizarre. So anyway, it did the job. I put some speakers in the doors, and as I got better and started working a steady job and having more money, I started putting money into the truck. I did rear shocks in it. I did those myself. I've never done those before. This was the first time. They were easy to do. So I put new rear shocks in it because it was kind of bouncy in the back. And at that point, winter was starting to hit. This was, I think this is the winter this was actually all within the first couple of months of ownership. I only had the vehicle a total of 6 months. So I bought it in probably February. I bought it in February, and I owned it for roughly 6 months total. So, yeah, we were still in the winter. I was driving home from work one day, and the fan, I could tell the fan was like locked, because I started, like, when I was taking off from a stop, it was the fan would just go full speed. Now this was these didn't have electronic cooling fans. They were driven right off the water pump belt. the fan was actually mounted to the end of the water pump, so it was spinning whenever the engine was spinning. But the difference is these fans have a clutch that when the water pump heats up to a certain temperature, the clutch locks up and the fan engages completely. And once the temperature goes down, the fan disengages and it freewheels. If that clutch ever fails, the fan will be either locked on completely or it won't spin at all. At least not to its full torque, you know. So I knew exactly what the problem was, and it turned out I had to replace the water pump. So I did a water pump in that truck and the thermostat after about a month or two of ownership. And I did that on my parents' driveway. Thanks, Dad. So, yeah, he never gave me a hard time about doing my own maintenance. I'm forever grateful for that. He'll always let me use his driveway to fix my car, which is it's just incredible. But so I did a water pump. I did I think I ended up doing a radiator in that truck at one point. So after I had the truck a good 6 months or so, I had received a settlement check from that car accident that I was in, which was the reason I had to buy the truck in the first place. So I had a little bit more money to spend on a vehicle, and that's exactly what I did. I decided that the truck was nice, but I wanted something nicer. Didn't deserve it, but I wanted it. You know, it was a want versus a need, and that's a recurring theme in my car purchases. So, you know, after spending the money on spray paint and making this ugly blue truck look like a beautiful black truck, flat black, I decided that it was time to move on. And that was when things started going south. So what happened was I was driving my cousin down to Rhode Island to see some family, and we noticed that the transmission would no longer go into overdrive, which was unfortunate. And we narrowed it down. My dad, who was once a Nissan mechanic, he helped me diagnose it. It was definitely the transmission computer. And for the life of me, I could not find another one to put in it. So it ran basically as a hydraulic 3-speed. That's all it had, 3 speeds. It wouldn't go into fourth or overdrive. So it ran in basically limp mode for the rest of the time I had the truck. I mean, it still drove fine, but if you were on the highway, forget it. I mean, it was tacking out at 6,000 RPM, for crying out loud. And it had no tachometer, so we really never knew how high it was going. So I never did get a TCM for it, and my cousin at that point needed a vehicle, so we worked out a deal where I was going to buy something else, and then I was going to sell him the truck for really pennies on the dollar. And that deal worked out okay for a little while, and then we'll talk more about how that went down later on in our next video. But I do have a funny story. So this truck came from the dealership that my dad once worked in back in the 1980s, and it was sold as a brand new vehicle from there. And I was cleaning the truck out shortly after I bought it, and I found an envelope under the passenger side of the bench seat, and I noticed that it had a name that I knew of. It wasn't the guy that I bought it from. It was the previous owner prior to that, because he bought it used. The person's name on the envelope was the owner. It was a personal, like something she was mailing out. It was the owner of the dealership that it originally came from. And I showed it to my dad, and he's like, "Holy crap!" So he told me the whole story about how this truck came off the he actually took it off the car carrier when it was new. He remembered this truck specifically because it was going directly to the owner of the dealership. She bought it for her father. So my dad recalled the story of how he backed it. He actually personally drove it off the car carrier when it was brand new from the factory. and he personally did the dealer prep on it because he was one of their favorite preppers, I guess. They knew him. They knew my dad very well, and they said, "Hey, we want you to take this particular vehicle off that truck, and you're going to put an AM/FM radio in it, and you're going to do a slider." So my dad did all the factory upgrades on it, or the dealer upgrades, and so he remembered it when it was new. And so I'm going to tell you, eventually my cousin ended up owning this truck, and he put it through its paces. We took it off-road. When it was under his ownership, we decided we were going to take it off-road, and it performed very well, I might add, for a two-wheel drive truck. He just beat the crap out of it. You know, he was a young kid like me, and he was a little older than me, but still, you know, we all have those urges once in a while to just destroy something on four wheels. So he basically destroyed the truck, and it ended up getting scrapped. That's why on my list I have it highlighted in red as being definitely scrapped, because that's exactly what happened to it. We ended up pulling the engine out of it, and I put it into another vehicle that I owned. I bought the engine back from my cousin, and I took that away. The rest of the truck ended up getting scrapped, but we did have a lot of fun with it, taking it off-road and beating the hell out of it. I feel bad about it now because it was a good little truck, and I should have just kept it, but you know. Sometimes we don't do the smartest things, the things that we should do, the things that we know we should do. Sometimes we just don't do those things. You know? So that poor little truck saw a very disgraceful end, but it had a good life and had a lot of owners. Well, 3 owners, 4 owners. So, anyway, that'll conclude our video for today. Thank you for watching. And my next video, number 5. Will be another mid-80s Nissan product. I won't spoil it for you now, but it was another fun little vehicle to own too. Alright, until then.